Hey, what's up, guys? Hello, so Football Talk here. Finishing up week 3 of our divisional draft breakdown series with the AFC South after talking about the NFC side of things earlier this week. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the draft classes of the Texans, Colts, Jaguars, and Titans. The previous 2 weeks, we've already talked about the North and East in each conference. And just quickly, kind of the rules of this thing here, more of a podcast version where we go team by team in alphabetical order, talking about the players themselves, their fit with the new team, and then kind of talk about the classes as a whole, before at the end we're going to rank the classes of these 4 teams against each other. Timestamps for all 4 are linked down below in the description, as well as a link to my most recent article, where I talk about my favorite games on the NFL schedule for 2021, and all my social media handles, if you like the content I provide and want to stay up to date with the things I post. But now let's get to the first team here, in the Houston Texans, who didn't have a pick until the 3rd round due to the Laramie Tunsil trade with the Miami Dolphins a couple of years ago. And they had 2 3rd rounders, with 67th overall Davis Mills, the quarterback out of Stanford, 89th overall Nico Collins, the wide receiver out of Michigan, 2 more 5th round picks, 147th overall Brevin Jordan, the tight end out of Miami, and 170th overall Garrett Wallow, the linebacker out of TCU, before already making the final pick here in the 6th round, 195th overall, Roy Lopez, the interior defensive lineman out of Arizona. So before we get into the player Davis Mills, with the whole Deshaun Watson situation, we had no idea how the Texans were going to approach this draft. And little did we know, they're going to go quarterback here with the first pick. And they probably panicked a little because they saw 2 quarterbacks selected within the last 3 picks before they were on the clock. And because of that, selected to stand for quarterback. And it's not like he doesn't have any talent. He was the number 1 overall quarterback recruit in the country in 2017, over guys like Tua Tagovailoa among others. He only has 11 career starts, taken over for the injured KJ Costello in 2019, and then having the COVID-shortened season this last year. Mills is a quick rhythm passer with a pretty rapid release. He excels in the quick game, reading leverages and defensive coverages pre-snap, and getting the ball to the right target instantly. He can attack all areas of the field and operate from within a pro-style offense, while also having some speed to him when he does decide to take off. However, he's just so inconsistent with his releases and position of his feet when he just feels a little bit of pressure up the middle, either fading away or having the ball nosedive on him. And when he doesn't see things as clearly and can confidently get the ball out, he makes some bad decisions and throws. With the lack of clarity in Houston about the quarterback situation with Deshaun Watson, right now I would say Tyrod Taylor is the starter for this team, and it's kind of hard to tell what exactly we'll get from offensive coordinator Tim Kelly and new head coach David Culler's influence on him. I believe Mills is in a situation that's very favorable for him to succeed, and I really think with those fundamentals that he does have to clean up, he will benefit from having a couple of years on the bench at least, if he does get chosen at some point down the road to start for this team. With the 2nd 3rd round pick, they went Nico Collins, the Michigan wide receiver. And you go back to the 2019 tape, I wasn't a huge fan of him. Actually like Donovan Peoples-Jones quite a bit more, who is now a pretty good receiver for the Browns. With Collins being just outside my top 100 overall prospects, they actually traded up with the very few picks that they had in this draft, so I didn't love that. But I do think Collins presents an intriguing skill set. What I really saw from him during Senior Bowl week is when he really impressed me with that ability to create separation, stack vertically, which you didn't really see a ton on tape back in 2019. And to go with that, he still has that ability to track the ball down the field, attack it in the air, through contact with a defender, outfight him for the ball in those 50-50 ball situations. Pretty good body control in that regard as well. Still growing in terms of incorporating different speeds and being a more well-versed route runner. But you look at that depth chart at the receiver position for Houston, with Brandon Cooks being really the only consistent contributor. Kiki Cutis had his flashes at the pro level, and Randall Cobb, he's kind of at the back end of his career, with injuries really taking a toll on him. And then they still have some veterans like Andre Roberts, Chris Conley, Dante Moncrief, nobody that really sticks out. So I think Collins has a good chance of starting on the outside for this team and making some plays, especially in the touchdown department, because he's going to be a weapon in the red zone with that frame ability to leap and winning contested catch situations. And then they picked again in the 5th round Brevin Jordan, the tight end out of Miami. Another kind of intriguing prospect, not really a prototypical wide tight end necessarily, used more as an H-back and detached from the line of scrimmage as a big slot receiver. And you look at that frame, like 6'3", 245 pounds, and he's really maxed out that frame that he has, still looking more like an oversized wide receiver, and that's kind of what he is to me. He does bring some things as a run blocker, putting him as a wing or H-back, where he can come across the formation or lead up into the hole as a blocker, but it's more his ability as a receiver in the slot, where he can work the underneath areas, and then it's really tough to bring down with the ball in his hands, has some pretty good pull-away speed, and really fights for every single yard, not afraid of running into people that are in his way either. At that size, doesn't really have a proven track record in contested catch situations, and doesn't have receiver speed, I would say. So I can see to some degree why he fell to this part, kind of a tweener in that regard, but I really looked at him more as a 3rd round pick, and I think he has some skills that will give him the opportunity to make plays for this team early on, with guys like Jordan Akins and Pharoh Cooper having their flashes for the Texans, who I thought could develop into more of your typical wide tight end. I think Jordan could easily lead that group in receiving yards as a rookie, more on the highlight portion, because there's not going to be a lot of people watching Texans games, but he can bring some excitement. And then with the 2nd pick in the 5th round, Garrett Wallow, the linebacker out of TCU, a former safety who earned his stripes through special teams for the Horned Frogs, and you can see it to some degree with his feel for route patterns and movement as a coverage defender in space. He can cover plenty of ground laterally when flowing with zone run plays, and he works downhill under good control, but he does lack certain size and length to deal with blockers in his face, and while his movement skills are closer to a linebacker than a member of the secondary, I also like what he does as an add-on rusher and quarterback spy, which you saw quite a bit of at TCU. So by trading Bernardo McKinney to Miami in exchange for Shaq Lawson, there is a hole now next to Zach Cunningham that I could see Wallow filling, or at least be used quite a bit in sub-packages. And the final pick for them was Roy Lopez, the D-tackle out of Arizona. 24 career tackles for loss and 9 sacks, so some pretty good production, primarily playing nose tackle for Arizona after being a grad transfer from New Mexico State. At 6 foot 305 pounds, with rather short arms and average athleticism at best for that size, he doesn't present the most attractive package, but he does play with a lot of energy and effort. The defensive line is actually by far the best thing the Texans have going for themselves, with Charles Omenihu being a mid-round pick a couple of years ago, then Ross Blacklock being an early 2nd round pick for them last year coming out of TCU, and bringing in Malik Collins as a free agent this year, so Lopez will add some depth to that unit. For the class as a whole, while I do like the 3 guys in the middle here, who could all have substantial roles for one of the teams that will be in the running for the 1st overall pick a year from now, I think Mills at the top, I just don't know what to really make of it. Nobody really knows what's going to happen after the Deshaun Watson situation. So maybe he's going to be your 3rd quarterback, and you never want your 1st pick in the draft to be number 3 on a depth chart. And at the end, Roy Lopez, more of a depth piece. Nothing that really excites me here. And if they do pick 1st overall next year because Deshaun Watson is shipped out of town, or I don't know what, they're probably going to pick a quarterback again. So what do you do with Mills then? Is he going to be a high quality backup maybe? But for a pick just after the 2nd round, I'm not sure if that's worth it. And that brings us to the Indianapolis Colts, who in the 1st round, 21st overall, selected Kwity Paye, the edge rusher out of Michigan. 2nd round, 54th overall, Deo Odeyingbo, the edge rusher / interior defensive lineman out of Vanderbilt. Round 4, 127th overall, Colin Granson, the tight end out of SMU. 5th round, 165th overall, Sean Davis, the safety out of Florida. 6th round, 218th overall, Sam Ehlinger, the quarterback out of Texas. And then 2 7th round picks, Mike Straken, I believe is how I pronounce it, the wide receiver out of Charleston. And finally, 248th overall, Will Fries, the offensive tackle / interior lineman out of Penn State. So at the top here, Kwity Paye, the number 1 guy on Bruce Feldman's freak list, mostly due to the ridiculous number that he put up in the free cone drill, the 2nd best time among all players from Michigan, including wide receivers and defensive backs. So that crazy change of direction, you see it on tape quite a bit, with his ability to threaten offensive linemen with his quickness off the snap, create issues, being able to get around guys, and you saw him move around quite a bit on passing downs as well. In the run game, almost robotic with the way that he locks out his arms, sets the edge, and is able also, when the ball carrier goes for the B gap, to redirect and bring that guy down for minimal yardage. Not sure if I'd call him a super explosive guy off the snap, and you rarely see him actually just drive guys back into the quarterback's lap, but just an interesting all-around skill set with the way that he can threaten offensive linemen in different ways. He wasn't a dominant player until 2020, when I thought he really took a step forward, but he does have the athletic upside to continue on growing. Obviously with the background, a great story there, but on the field, not sure if he's going to be your alpha pass rusher right away, but like I said, has the skills to develop into that role, and is going to be an impact player from day one. And then in the second round, Dayo Odeyingbo, a guy that I was very high on, coming out of Vanderbilt, looked at by most as an edge rusher. I thought he was more of your 4 or 4-eye technique, the guy who plays head up or slid inside to the offensive tackle. And this guy, really, the explosiveness and the power off the snap are really a crazy combination. Can be a disruptor in the backfield, but also take on blocks and own the point of attack. We saw him keep contained in the run game on the edge, but also line up inside and create issues for the offense. There were plenty of series where he was basically lined up at nose tackle for several snaps, and when the offense changed things up in like a 2-minute situation and they were running the ball, he had no issues holding his own, even against some combo blocks. Like the force he has in his hands, you can put him out on the edge and he can drive through offensive tackles, but at the same time create issues for guards and centers with his ability to win with quickness. Kind of a reckless play at this point, not always showing a clear plan of attack off the snap, but somebody who can really create some issues for the offense. Just with him having suffered a torn Achilles in this pre-draft process, in some workouts, you're not really sure if he's going to be available until late at least. So I thought here in the second round, it was surprising for me to hear his name called here, even though I definitely liked him on tape. But in that range, with the injury that he has, I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable making that pick. And then on day 3, they went Colin Granson, the tight end out of SMU, kind of an undersized player for the tight end position, at 6'2", 240 pounds, and you rarely saw him actually get used as a true Y. More of a slot receiver basically, who did have some nice production for the Mustangs these last 2 years. He can stretch the seams as your number 3 in trips, he can run double moves, and even took some end arounds occasionally for SMU. I like his ability to put hands on people in space, creating opportunities for his teammates in the screen game, but he won't bring you anything as an inline blocker. He doesn't have the height or long arms to sky over defenders, and he did drop 5 passes this past season. So this was certainly early for me as pretty much a slot receiver who you can use in some H-back duty to some degree. And looking at this roster, like, he's not going to touch Jack Doyle in terms of somebody who can play in the box, or Morley Cox as a specimen and designated pass catcher at the tight end position. So I'm not sure what kind of impact he's going to have early on. And not only were the tight ends that I like better in this range, but with the player that I'm assuming he's going to be, I think there were some big-bodied receivers as well who can fill that role. Then move on to the 5th round, Sean Davis, the Florida safety. A very aggressive player, presents plenty of range. You see him in the run game, the way he can fill the alley, gets him into some trouble as well with being too aggressive with his angles, and he does leave his feet too much as a tackler, but won't shy away from getting involved and has some suddenness to get around tight ends and stuff like that when they matched up against him. You saw him playing the high post, but also drop down low. And what you really like about him, getting matched up against tight ends down the field, he won't allow those guys to box him out, which is going to be a major asset in the red zone if you want to deploy him that way. And that's kind of how I look at him as, because I don't see him matching up against wide receivers a ton. What I saw during the Senior Bowl week, getting torn apart by some of those receivers, and to be honest, some tight ends as well, turning around the wrong way and just getting off balance. Like, there were some tough reps for him, a really bad week for him overall, that probably made him drop at least 1 round. But you like the range and aggression that he displays. And then in the 6th round, Sam Ellinger, the quarterback out of Texas, does have a big arm, and one of the toughest players that you will ever see. Just a really strong physical runner at the quarterback position, like almost unheard of. You're getting flashbacks of Tim Tebow when you're watching him, and he's actually a more consistent thrower than Tebow coming out, but that's kind of the player that you're getting, I believe. Like, I don't think he has the consistent enough accuracy to be a full-time starter at any point in the NFL. has some impressive power throws on tape, and maybe you have a certain package that you want to get him involved with. But they just traded for Carson Wentz, coming over from Philadelphia. They already drafted Jacob Eason in the 4th round, I believe it was last year, who's a really talented passer. And now to get Sam Ehlinger, who's gonna be a QB3 at best. If he doesn't even make that roster, I would actually not be surprised if he's gonna be carried on the practice squad. And maybe in some certain matchups, they want to incorporate some packages with him. But he's not gonna be able to run the way he did in college, in the NFL, because that career for him is not gonna last very long if he does. And then the 2 7th round picks here, Mike Straken, the wide receiver out of Charleston, one of those height, weight, speed freaks at 6'5", 225 pounds, running 4.5 flat. I only got to really watch his highlights and check out his stats, but he dominated the Division II with 106 yards per game and 18.5 yards per grab these last 2 years, while scoring 27 combined touchdowns. We have yet to see anything from him against a high level of competition, and he did have quite a few drops, but he has a massive catch radius, good body control, and ability to track the ball. Those are certainly impressive. So if he can contribute on special teams, those skills are worth honing and to keep him around on that roster. And finally, Will Fries, the offensive tackle / interior lineman out of Penn State, 6'6", 310 pounds, has started 42 games at Penn State, with the majority of those coming at right tackle, but he did also start multiple ones on the blind side and inside at guard. And that's good, because I don't really see him playing on the edge for any extended stretches at the next level. He does have a pretty good understanding for angles and taking advantage of defenders being too aggressive with attacking upfield as a run blocker. To go with being familiar with skip pulls, and you see him force pass rushers to go through him with a pretty good anchor to complement that. But there is no explosiveness to really speak of to overwhelm edge defenders in that regard, and he has issues with weight transitioning in the pass game, which he tries to compensate by lunging and grabbing cloth while drawing flags in the process. So with the signing of Eric Fisher in free agency, they did address the whole left tackle Anthony Costanzo suddenly retiring, even though we have no idea when Fisher will be ready after he got hurt in the AFC title game. But I really thought they might go there in the 1st round, and was surprised that Fries was the only pick along the offensive line, when he will have a tough time even making that roster, simply because the Colts have more talented guys already there. I know they needed to address the edge rush department as well, but Pace still has some stuff to learn, and Theo might not even be able to play this year until late at least. They did get a couple of guys who probably won't see the field anytime soon in the middle rounds. They might have wasted a pick on a quarterback if they don't envision a specific package for him, which Carson Wentz already wasn't a big fan of in Philadelphia. So overall, a rather questionable draft class for me for the Colts here. As great as Chris Ballard has been in recent years, and he has earned that respect from me and people around the league in terms of the players that he picks, because so many of them have really panned out. But just from the evaluation that I've made personally, looking at the roster, what they needed, and the player they acquired here, I'm not totally sold on it. And that brings us to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had the number 1 overall pick, and surprise, surprise, they picked Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback out of Clemson. Then with the 2nd first-round pick, 25th overall, they selected his teammate Travis Etienne, the running back. 2nd round, 33rd overall, Tyson Campbell, the cornerback out of Georgia. And 45th overall, Walker Little, the offensive tackle out of Stanford. Then in the 3rd round, 65th overall, Andre Cisco, the safety out of Syracuse. 2 4th-round picks, 106th overall, Jay Tufele, the interior defensive lineman out of USC. And 121st overall, Jordan Smith, the edge rusher out of South Florida. 5th round, 145th overall, Luke Farrell, the tight end out of Ohio State. And 6th round, 209th overall, Jalen Camp, the wide receiver out of Georgia Tech. So obviously here, 1st overall, Trevor Lawrence. He was the number 1 overall prospect on most people's boards, and really the number 1 overall pick in this draft ever since we saw him tear apart Alabama's defense in the 2018 National Championship game. Has all the clubs in his bag, can really attack all areas of the field. And the thing that really sticks out for me when I watch the tape on him, the amount of far hash throws, so throwing from one hash to the opposite sideline and driving the ball with confidence. It's almost absurd how comfortable he was making those type of throws, especially in the college game where you have those wider hashes. So he can make all those NFL level throws, has some pretty good anticipation, being able to kind of hang in there and let things develop. hold out until the last second to see if a deep route will break open, and then going underneath it at the last moment if he has to. More of a lanky frame at 6'6", but pretty good reactionary quickness, being able to operate within the pocket, but also escape it, and then has really good underrated speed almost. Like, you're not going to run for 70 plus yard touchdowns against an Ohio State defense that is loaded with talent, unless you have some real wheels. And his accuracy doesn't really drop when he has to throw on the move. His issues at this point stem from when the picture changes post-snap, when defenses do more complex things in terms of coverage rotations, which he's going to have a little bit of growing pains at the next level here, coming from a rather simplistic offense with a bunch of quick screens to the wide receivers, shallow crosses, and then really attacking outside the hashes, but has all the tools to be a franchise quarterback for the next decade plus. Maybe a little bit of a long strider where he needs some space to step into throws, but we've seen him also make throws from his back foot and his accuracy not drop off dramatically. So you're kind of nitpicking here if you're looking at him. Like, I would be shocked if he wasn't a high quality starter for a long time. And then they come back with the second first round pick, and they get his teammate who was lining up next to him for the last 3 years pretty much, in Travis Etienne, the most explosive big play back in this draft. And that was definitely surprising with Najee Harris going a pick earlier, so you have back-to-back running backs. And I thought Harris was the much more complete back. And with Etienne it was surprising because I really like James Robinson in last year's draft, was one of the very few people that you will ever find out there who had him as a top 10 running back. And he had a really good rookie season. If not for guys like Justin Herbert and Justin Jefferson, he's a serious threat for winning Offensive Rookie of the Year. And that was with missing a couple of weeks late. But I think Etienne complements well what they already have in Robinson, who's more of your thumping inside runner, has some burst out to the edges, and can make things happen in the open field. But with Etienne, you get somebody who has that instant acceleration, that ability to stick his foot in the ground in a zone run scheme, blow by second and even third level defenders, can rip off 70-80 yard type of runs on any given play. Maybe not the most diverse in terms of being able to execute different running schemes. At least we haven't seen it at Clemson, and can kind of get over his skis, not really manipulate second level defenders and open up lanes for himself, but very much relies on that burst. So that's why I clearly had him as the number 2 running back only behind Harris, who I also think is a more complete passing down back, because Etienne's not the greatest at protecting the passer, but they're already working him out as a receiver almost exclusively during rookie minicamp, which I think is very surprising, because I'm not sure if he has the most natural hands, but obviously you get him involved on some quick dump-offs or screen passes, and he can take those to the house on any given play as well. So the value here in the first round to get my number 2 running back, I didn't love, even though that's about the range in overall rankings, which doesn't take positional value into account. That's about where I had him, so I'm not going to hate too much on it. But with the plan, that roster that they have right now, having somebody at the running back position who I think is a plus contributor already, that was certainly surprising, but at least he gives you that big playmaking ability that they didn't have a ton of guys on that offense with that skill set. And then they come back at the top of day 2 with Tyson Campbell, the cornerback out of Georgia, somebody who I thought could sneak into day 1. I'm not as high on him, but I can see why a lot of people like him. Very technically sound at the line of scrimmage, being able to stick with wide receivers and man coverage, or work out of press bail situations with a lot of deep coverage there at Georgia. You saw him match up against a lot of ex-receivers, and with a lot of the big plays that he gave up, he was right there in the hip pocket of the receiver, right there in position, and that's something that he has to work on. Like, he has the athletic traits to stay in position and be right there as the ball arrives, but has to do a better job of finding that balance between looking at the receiver and trying to find the ball in the air, being able to swipe through the receiver's hands and break up passes. The ball skills, a bit of a question mark, although at the Georgia Pro Day, looked pretty natural going through those on-field drills and catching the ball, attacking it in the air. So maybe that's just something that we haven't really seen him do a ton of, and he's not super comfortable yet doing with his back to the quarterback. But you bring in Campbell here to go along with last year's top 10 pick, CJ Henderson. You bring back Trey Herndon. You sign Shaquille Griffin in free agency. Like, you can never have enough corners, and this team has plenty of those guys, with a lot of them being able to play a lot of man coverage. So that's going to be interesting to watch exactly what they do on defense. With Joe Cullen coming over from Baltimore, as the de facto defensive coordinator. And then with the second pick in the second round, they go Walker Little, the offensive tackle out of Stanford. One of the biggest question marks in this entire draft, because you look at his history, once a top 5 overall recruit in the country, Little became the first true freshman since 2000 to start at left tackle for Stanford, making the All-American freshman team, and then being the first team All-Pac-12 selection the following season. However, we haven't really seen him be on a football field since September of 2019, when he tore his ACL one game into the year, and then he opted out of this past season. So the range for him really was sneaking into the first round potentially to a day 3 pick, even though his name was picking up steam throughout this process. Because he was considered a potential top 10 pick heading into his junior year, but we just haven't seen him play. And it was far from perfect in his last full season, where he saw his weight shifted too far to the outside foot a lot of times in passing situations, and there were some balance issues throughout the tape. But his jump off the snap, the mobility and power in his lower body, he has those athletic feet to be a top tier protector and already got the job done as a 19-year-old. So the sky's really the limit for this guy, and his excellent pro day showing certainly made Jacksonville more comfortable about him. But I would have been more confident about a couple of other offensive tackles in that range, and they better be damn sure about his medical reports. Then in the third round, Andre Cisco, one of my favorite safety prospects in this draft, was deployed quite a bit as a true center fielder, even though they started from split safety looks a lot of times, where you saw him rotate to the deep middle or drop down low. Really solid build at like 6'2", 205 pounds, something like that, and for that size has some incredible range. You see him make plays all over the field, and he really was a playmaker for Syracuse, with 13 career interceptions in just 24 games. Excels at tracking the ball down the field and making plays on it. You see him give up quite a few big plays as well himself, but you're going to get that with a playmaking safety, and I would say Syracuse put him in some really tough situations, at times having to cover some slot receivers from 15 yards off or something like that. Like with that kind of cushion and receivers having a two-way go, it's going to be tough for him to stay with those guys, but more than held his own, I would say, and like I said, came up with a bunch of big plays for his defense. He can play the high post, he can drop down into the shallow areas, and rob those out routes where he made a bunch of his interceptions on. As well as you can put him in the slot, even against some tight ends, and he can play some quality man coverage for you. Like, in terms of a combo safety, one of the better ones that we've had coming out in recent years, and I think he's going to give that defense a lot of flexibility, being able to play a lot of different coverages and mix things up on the back end. And then with the first pick of day 3, they selected Jay Tufele, the USC defensive tackle. And I talked about his teammate, Marlon Tuipulotu, who went in the 6th round, I believe, going to Philadelphia, who I personally like better as more of your shade nose tackle. Tufele is a very different type of player, where he has his issues anchoring against double teams, those things that Tuipulotu really excelled at. Tufele is more of your penetrating free technique, where he's not even going to be asked to stack and shed a whole lot of, but be used more in that role where the previous Jaguars regime envisioned Taven Bryan to really excel at. Somebody who has that explosiveness out of his stance to really create issues up the B-gap, flash in the backfield as a run defender, and then on passing downs, has that quickness, some power to him as well, to be able to create issues as a rusher. He was getting overhyped by some people, and I thought here at the top of day 3, that's about where he should have gone, because you're kind of pigeonholing yourself with that type of player, a very specific scheme fit, but with the personnel that they have there for an even front, I think he can replace Bryan when his contract runs out a year from now, and right away he can give you something on passing downs where you can rotate those guys through and keep them all fresh. And then late in the 4th round, they selected Jordan Smith, another guy on the defensive line here, coming out of South Florida, and he's somebody who can really threaten offensive tackles with his speed around the edge, to go with flashing a very sudden spin move and being able to take advantage of the inside path opening up. With him, he just doesn't bring much power to the table when offensive tackles get out of position, when he set him too softly, to transition speed to power, but really excelled as this hybrid outside linebacker for South Florida, where you saw him set the edge in the run game, as well as dropping back to some degree to those shallow zone areas. He was once the top 100 overall recruit for Florida, and there were some issues getting suspended ahead of a bowl game, where he had to move on to community college before going to South Florida. But since he's arrived there, he's been a very productive player for them. and right away gives you somebody off the edge on passing down so you can get out there. Actually, kind of a similar play, I would say, that they got last year in K'Lavon Chaisson, coming out of LSU, one of the first round picks. And once again, you have those bodies who you can rotate through, keep everybody fresh. All of a sudden, this defense is taking on shape. But then in the 5th round, they went with Luke Farrell, tight end out of Ohio State. And he didn't get a lot of love at Ohio State because they also have Jeremy Ruckert there, who's going to be a higher draft pick a year from now, just has more athletic upside as a pass catcher. While Farrell was doing a lot of the dirty work for the Buckeyes, like executing sift blocks on the backside of split zone runs, getting the running backs out to the edges, while getting very few chances to actually touch the ball and make something with it. Nothing that will really excite you in terms of making things happen after the catch, just a very solid inline tight end. And with Penn State's tight end coach there now in Jacksonville, I thought they could have actually gone Pat Freiermuth with one of their 2nd round picks, but they clearly won't value the position a whole lot in that offense, which Trevor Lawrence didn't really have any difference maker at the tight end position there anyway at Clemson. Before finally in the 6th round, they selected Jalen Camp, the wide receiver out of Georgia Tech, and he's somebody whose name I was familiar with because he was referred to as one of the top special teams players in this draft, so I had to go back to the tape and check him out. Camp is close to 6'2", 220 plus pounds. He really jumped out of the gym and ran the mid-4.4s at his pro day. He first came onto my radar when he made it onto Bruce Feldman's freak list for his achievements in the weight room as a late bloomer in terms of football career. With only 48 career catches in college for barely 800 yards, the production as a receiver isn't really there, and his route running needs some refinement, as well as his hand swipes to get off press. But you see him blow by safeties, make some tough catches with the defender on his back, and use his big frame to shield the ball, to go with what he brings covering kicks and as a core special teamer. So I would expect him to make that roster, simply by what he brings in that facet of the game, as well as having the developmental skills as a receiver. Looking at this class in totality, simply by getting Trevor Lawrence at number 1, that's going to fill his seats in the stadium, and he gives you a chance to build up something special to go with Urban Meyer there in Jacksonville. You get his former teammate at Clemson, Travis Etienne, as that explosive option off the backfield. Not sure if I love that pick for a team that is still building to go with a running back position when they already had James Robinson there. And I wasn't as big on Tyson Campbell or Walker Little right away, with Campbell being more of a 3rd round pick to me, and Walker Little just the insecurity, me not knowing really about his medical reports. But then I loved Andre Cisco in the 3rd round, one of the most complete safeties that we've seen coming into the draft. A couple of guys on that D-line who could develop into starters, but at least give you some ability to rotate guys through. An unspectacular quality block at the tight end position for a room that really needed an improvement. And then a core special teamer and developmental wide receiver in Jalen Camp here at the end. So while not blown away with what they did, with all the resources that they had, I think this was definitely a solid draft. And that brings us to the final team here, the Tennessee Titans. Let's quickly run through these picks. 1st round, 22nd overall, Caleb Farley, the cornerback out of Virginia Tech. 2nd round, 53rd overall, Dylan Radunes, the offensive tackle out of North Dakota State. 2 3rd round picks, 92nd overall, Monty Rice, the linebacker out of Georgia. And pick number 100, Elijah Molden, the safety / cornerback out of Washington. 2 more 4th round picks, 109th overall, Des Fitzpatrick, the wide receiver out of Louisville. And 135th overall, Rashad Weaver, the edge rusher out of Pittsburgh. And then 2 more 6th round picks, 205th overall, Racey McMath, the wide receiver out of LSU, and 215th overall, Brady Breeze, the safety out of Oregon. So with their 1st round pick, the Titans do something that they already did 2 years ago, taking advantage of a talented player slipping in the draft with Jeffrey Simmons back then, now with Caleb Farley, and the situation's a little bit different because it's not like he's coming off an injury that we have a really good feel about how long the recovery process is going to be and that everything's going to be clean. Because with Farley in 2019 had those back spasms that he was working through, then opted out this past season, and now late in the process he had this cleanup surgery on his back. So we don't know exactly if that's going to be a reoccurring issue. I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to speak too much about it, but it's those plates in between his vertebrae that were swelling up and they had to be worked on, where there's like a 20% chance that it's going to be an issue for him going forward. But purely based on tape, he was my number 1 corner in the draft. Just some of the things he can do that he can't really teach. There are some things that he still has to clean up. Not the most technically sound corner necessarily, almost getting in this basketball stance at times, mirroring guys. But just that explosiveness that he has, while he is quite tall, that lanky frame, but still being able to come out of his breaks and drive on slant routes when he's in off coverage, which he was asked to do a ton of at Virginia Tech. There's still plenty of room for him to grow as a press corner, but already very tough job there. As a player on defense for only 2 years, was a wide receiver before that, and the Hokies really trusted him, almost letting him cover one half of the field basically at times. While those wide receiver skills, they come into play when you see it down the field, the way he attacks the ball, how confident he is, the ball skills that he possesses. You watch the Miami game from 2019, where they tried to go after him deep a few times, and that was a mistake that he made them pay for. In zone coverage, his feel and ability to read his keys is still a bit of a work in progress, but he can certainly be used that way, and even more so, I think he has the capability of being a true number one shutdown corner, which they needed that type of player after already losing Adoree Jackson for agency. Farley was a top 10 prospect for me, not taking injury into account, so Tennessee could have another steal at the hand. And then they come back in the second round and they get Dylan Raduns, the North Dakota State offensive tackle, another guy who I had a fringe first round grade on. You watch his tape at North Dakota State, it's almost flawless, and you want to see what he can do against better competition, as the FCS didn't have a 2020 season, and then he's coming to the Senior Bowl, and he was the best tackle there, just so technically sound. Some questions about his ability to anchor, those never really showed up. Being able to really mirror guys around the edge, be effective with his hand placement. Like, there's so many things to like. Maybe a little light, just over 300 pounds, but he has a frame where he can add a little bit to it. And then in the run game, there's some serious power there, getting off the ball with some aggression. You also saw him slide inside to some degree in those unbalanced lines, where he was really moving people, especially in the zone run game, which you're gonna see with the Titans here. Just being able to engage and keep that movement going. I think he was a really good pick here in the middle of the second round, where I look at that right tackle position, having lost Dennis Kelly in free agency, and a first round pick from a year ago, Isaiah Wilson, him turning out to be a bust due to just not being mature enough to be a pro. I think Raduns as a rookie is going to be better than both those guys would have been, and really his only competition comes in form of Kendall Lamb and Tyson Brilo, so I think there's a clear path for him. And then we move to the third round, where first to get Monty Rice, the Georgia linebacker, somebody who I thought was really underrated in this pre-draft process. When he first came to Georgia, he was looked at as this future version of Roquan Smith. Not quite sure if he lived up to that hype, but has been a really good starter in the SEC for the last 3 years. As a run defender, very patient, great at reading his keys and letting those take him to the ball, while not overrunning his fits. And in the pass game, you see some real range. Just watch the Alabama game, where he's basically carrying Jalen Waddle down the seams, who's one of the fastest players in college football, and he's only like a step behind him, so you can't really expect any linebacker to really stick with him, but just to be in position there, that's highly impressive. Was taking off the field quite a bit actually on passing downs, not totally sure why. I think he has a pretty good skill set for it. The biggest issue with him, I believe, is in space, when ball carriers have a lot of room to make him miss and stuff like that. He's not super comfortable in those one-on-one tackling situations, but overall a really solid player. I think could be a starter in the NFL for a decade. And looking at the Titans depth chart, just having declined the 50 option of Rashaan Evans, so I could easily see Rice step in for him a year from now, play alongside Jayon Brown, where you have another really solid linebacker duo, and Rice is going to be a long-term starter for you. And then Elijah Molden, the Washington safety slash nickelback, could really him be like a top 50 pick, and I was actually surprised to see him drop this far. Had a COVID-shortened 2020 season. Ahead of this, he was looked at as the top slot corner in this draft, and I haven't really seen anything that would make you think otherwise. In 2019, almost a pure nickel, where you really like the physicality and the feistiness that he plays with, some really good reactionary athleticism, those quicks and explosiveness, where he could have his hips pointed the wrong way and still be able to get back into phase and then fight for the ball in the air, while also being a physical edge set in the run game. And then this past season, we saw him more at deep safety with a lot of too high looks, where they rotated him down, or also had him to some degree playing the high post. I really like his feel in zone coverage, and he has plenty of range for it, where I want to see him as closer to the line of scrimmage. Maybe he's going to be a starting nickel here in Tennessee. After they just lost Desmond King in free agency, They traded for him in the middle of this past season and haven't really found anything to replace him. While they do have a lot of those safety nickel hybrids, I think Molden has a clear shot at starting for his team, whether it's alongside Kevin Byard as that second safety or in the slot. And he's going to be an impact player for them, where he gives them that versatility and allows them to do a lot of different things on the back end. And then we move on to day 3 with Des Fitzpatrick, the Louisville wide receiver, really solid receiver prospect, won't blow by defenders down the sideline or make safeties look stupid with the ball in his hands really, but great at using his hands to get off press, kind of deceptive as a route runner with head fakes and changing up footwork, as a player that gets the little details right. And while he may not have top tier speed necessarily, he does a great job of using his inside arm to stack corners, tracking the ball down the field, and then attacking it at its highest point. I liked what I saw from him during Senior Bowl week, but he'll certainly have a tougher time separating against NFL corners. I believe Josh Reynolds, who they brought in via free agency, will have a sneaky good season for Tennessee, but by losing Corey Davis, there's plenty of vacant targets, and I think Fitzpatrick has a good chance of taking up quite a few of those as their wide receiver 3. And then with that second 4th round pick, Rashad Weaver, the Pittsburgh edge rusher, really well schooled, strong defensive end, has those heavy hands where he can really set the edge in the run game. As a pass rusher, can win with power, but also really active with his hands, just keeps on working, and he has that ability to flatten to the quarterback and finish. Just with him, he doesn't have that explosiveness to really threaten tackles off the snap, doesn't have those athletic tools like his teammate Patrick Jones on the other side has, but with him, day 1, he's going to be a more impactful player, I believe. You already had Harold Landry, and you brought in Bud Dupree this offseason, so you add in Weaver to that rotation, especially on passing downs, where you have the flexibility. Weaver has the kind of body type where you can line it up inside, or you put him out to the edge, and you use Dupree more as your stand-up, blitzing linebacker, which I think he would have done more of in Pittsburgh if it wasn't for TJ Watt already taking that role, as he has progressed as a player. So either way, having those legitimate free edge defenders, that makes a lot of sense. There's already been some legal issues that I'm not totally aware of. Maybe they've already been cleared up. Don't want to speak too much on it. Weaver got some hype late in the process, where I thought this is about the range where he should have gone. And for a team that needed some more help, some more depth at the edge rusher position, this is a good pick for them. And that brings us to the 2 6th round picks. First with Racey McMath, the LSU wide receiver, the 3rd receiver actually out of LSU. And with him, I just can't get the picture out of my head. Seeing him down during the Senior Bowl week, just not being able to create any separation, really not having those details, like I just talked about with Fitzpatrick, not having those details down. He did run in the mid-4.3s, I believe, at the LSU Pro Day, so he has some speed, and he's going to have to prove himself from special teams. But as a route runner, like I said, there's a lot of things that he still has to learn. Just haven't seen him be able to really separate. Didn't watch him specifically a ton of, but I saw him during Terrace Marshall's tape, and he didn't really stick out to me there either. So like I said, somebody who's going to have to really excel in special teams to get a role here. And then finally, Brady Breeze, the safety out of Oregon, who opted out the 2020 season and surprisingly entered this draft because he probably got some insight that he'll get drafted. But for him to then go this late makes things kind of weird. I think he's a good player though. He's under 200 pounds and his range is limited to some degree, but he plays bigger than the size indicates, working upfield and sticking his face in the fan as a run defender without any hesitancy. In deep coverage, you rarely see him allow people to get behind him, with a lot of split safety coverages at Oregon, and he has plenty of experience dropping down into the slot as well, where he shows pretty good burst out of his breaks and works to dislodge the ball from the intended target. In 2019, he held opposing quarterbacks to passer rating in the mid-30s, and I think Mike Vrabel will really love him as a player. And while they now have quite a few guys, like I said, in that hybrid safety nickel role, with Amani Hooker, Dane Cruikshank, and Elijah Molden now in play, I believe he'll make some special teams and earn snaps on defense that way as well. So overall as a class for the Titans here, while they did take a bit of a risk at the top here, I think it's one worth taking because I believe Fali was the most talented corner in this class, and if he doesn't have issues with that back, I think he's going to be a star in the league. Raduns is going to be an instant starter on the right side of the offensive line and an upgrade to what you had last season while giving you that long-term flexibility. Not totally sure what exactly Molden's role will be on defense, but I believe he's going to start right away. And Monty Rice, he's going to be in there next year probably if they don't resign Rashaan Evans. They get a solid, well-schooled number 3 wide receiver in Fitzpatrick, and depending on the whole situation with Weaver, a really good third edge rusher. To go with a couple of guys who will have to establish themselves on special teams, with Brees being one of those guys who I can really see the coaches fall in love with. So altogether, I really liked what the Titans did in this draft. And that brings us to a divisional draft rankings, where you're going to find the Titans here at number 1. I didn't think the AFC South had a great draft altogether, but the Titans kind of stand out here as this team that got better right away with some guys who are going to be real impact players for them down the road. Then you have the Jacksonville Jaguars, where they took Trevor Lawrence number 1 overall, so if he just lives up to his ceiling, it doesn't really matter what else they did in the draft. Not totally sure if I agreed with all of the picks that they made, especially getting another running back in the first round when you already had a pretty good one from a year ago. Those 2 second round picks I didn't love, but Andre Cisco, one of my favorite safeties like I already talked about, I think he has superstar potential. And I'll be interested to see what these Jags can do down the road by building up a pretty talented roster actually that not a lot of people talk about. Then you have the Colts, who I believe are favored to win the AFC South right now. Not sure if they got many instant impact players, a few developmental guys, and their second round pick, Dayo Odeyingbo, having suffered the torn Achilles in the pre-draft process. I don't know if he's even going to play at all during his rookie season, so they might have allowed the Titans to overtake them in the favorite role. And then at the bottom here, the Houston Texans, kind of a mess of a franchise at this point. They have so many other things that they have to figure out here, and they didn't really help themselves with this draft class either. With all the uncertainty around the quarterback position, them going with the first pick, they finally get on the clock in the third round, pick a quarterback in Davis Mills, who I thought was more of a top of day free guy anyway, and you don't even know if he's going to play for you at all, because you're a contender for that first overall pick next year, which if you are and Deshaun Watson's out of the building, you're going to be picking a quarterback again. And then to trade up again into the third round, when you don't have many assets to begin with, and you really need some players that can develop for you, just don't agree with the way they approach this thing. So I think the Colts and Texans here, 2 of the most questionable draft classes overall. The Jaguars, I didn't love everything they did, but there's certainly some separation to the other 2 teams. And then I think the Titans, they have by far the best draft in this division. And that's going to bring us to the end here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a couple of friends who want to catch up on those divisional draft breakdowns that we've done here. As I've already discussed, the North, East, and now South are complete in both conferences, and we're going to get to the West next week. Make sure to check out the link in my description where I talk about my favorite games on the NFL schedule, as well as my social media handles to stay up to date with all the content that I put out there. You can also see those on the screen right now. And I'm going to be back next Tuesday with the NFC West. So until then, see you later. Peace.